Assalamualaikum everyone. Welcome to the first episode of Dip and Deep, where we will be digging deeper into important issues surrounding our local Muslim community. In today's episode, we will be exploring 13% of the Muslim community. Now, who are they and why are we touching on them? They are the Indian Muslims. There is a primary and common misconception that all the Muslims in Singapore are ethnically Malay. This misconception probably stems from the fact that 80% of the local Muslim community are ethnically Malay. However, it is important to note that race and religion are independent of one another. And in today's episode, we will be digging deeper into this minority group of Muslims who share a rich culture, history, and contributions to Singapore. Let's hear from them.
Ready, 3, 2, 1, action.
Okay, so to start off, could you introduce yourself by telling us your name and your age?
Okay, my name is Laili and I'm going to be 26 years old this year. I'm Zubaida and I am 24, turning 25.
Right, so I'm Arshad and I am now 22, going to be 23 years old. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sarah and I'm 23.
Assalamualaikum everyone, I'm Simra, I'm 22 years old.
Tasneem and I'm 21.
So could you share with us what your ethnic background is and what your mother tongue was in school?
Okay, so I'm actually, I'm like my race on my IC is Chinese, but so my mom is Indian and my dad is Chinese. But then, ironically, in school I studied, my second language was Malay. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm a Tamil Indian Muslim, but I took Malay as my mother tongue all the way until Sec 4. Yeah. My mother tongue was Malay. It's very difficult to get into my ethnic background because it's a mess. It's honestly rojak, as I like to describe it. But I am half Indian. The other half is where I say the rojak happens. My dad's kind of a mix of a lot of races. I did a DNA test once. Still not very reliable. But yeah, so I'm, I guess, a quarter Malay, a quarter Arab, plus Chinese, plus God only knows.
I'm biracial, so I'm Malay and Indian, and I studied Malay in school.
Ethnically, I'm Indian, or more so a Tamil, and I took Tamil in school.
So I'm Indian Muslim and growing up I took Urdu in school. And fun fact, not every Indian speaks Tamil. I think that's a common misconception. So there's like hundreds of languages, not even dialects, that are spoken in India, and they have their own script and like they sound really different, and they're spoken in different parts of India.
Share with us why you chose to speak Malay.
So that's the thing, I didn't choose it. I went to this kindergarten, a Muslim kindergarten. It's called Ilyas Kindergarten. When I was young, my parents sent me there. So like it was, there was a lot of Malay language, like we were taught in Malay for certain subjects. And also my grandma, like the grandma that I live with and like stays with me, she speaks to me mostly in Malay as well. So because of that, I was already speaking a lot in Malay when I went into primary school, and my parents just thought that it would be an easier transition to take Malay in primary school instead of Tamil. Yeah.
Okay, actually, it wasn't really my choice. So like back in the day, like back when I was like about K2 was like I think 5-6 years old, right? K1, K2. So that's when my mother put me in Chinese because Chinese ma. Then but then when I went to Chinese lessons, I didn't learn anything. I was every day when I went home, my mom would ask, "Okay, so what did you learn today?" Then I was like, "I don't know." I would go on to play, like I don't know, with my toys or something, and like it happened every day. So my mom got worried because like at K2 the next thing is primary school and results actually gonna will matter. So yeah, then my parents was like, okay, you know what, maybe let's just put him in Malay, maybe he could learn better. And yeah, most definitely I did learn better when they put me in Malay. But I think that was because like at home I only speak English, and I would speak Tamil to my grandfather and I speak Malay to my grandmother. But I don't use Chinese at all. So maybe that's why when I went to Chinese lessons, like I didn't know anything. So I just zoned out probably. I can't really remember, but yeah, so that's the funny story as to how I actually got into studying Malay as my second language.
How proficient would you say your Tamil is?
Actually, okay, spoken-wise, my Tamil, it takes time. So I need to think before I speak. So I will speak slowly. But I'm actually quite proud of how well I can speak Tamil because at least I watch a lot of Tamil movies. I can understand Tamil very well. But it's because of the lack of practice, I guess. So my pronunciation and my fluency is not there. But yeah, I would say my Tamil is a solid 7 out of 10. Dr. Ashad Rahman, if you know him, yes.
Well, I went to a madrasa, so I didn't really have that much of a choice in what my mother tongue was. But at the same time, my family does primarily speak in English and Malay. I didn't speak Malay very well either up until I started school because I had to assimilate to the madrasa culture where a lot of our lessons are taught in Malay and Arabic. Of course, our academic subjects were taught in English as well. But I was a lot more comfortable with English. Still I am, honestly. But I would like to say that my Malay has improved through my time in madrasa. On my mom's side of the family, they do speak Hindi sometimes, but it's mostly when my mummies and mamus are gossiping among one another. So yeah.
And I think that my family, because when we migrated to Singapore, like my family was one that just kept to our roots, our Indian roots, because I'm a first/second gen Singaporean, and so I think we're pretty early up there, and I think that's also why it's easier for us to keep to our Tamil roots, because I understand that quite a bit of Indian Muslims out there in the community, they may be quite further down in like the generations, and perhaps they may not exactly keep to their language roots per se, but perhaps they keep to their culture and then they adopt like a different language, which is most probably Malay in Singapore. Yeah.
Well, so I grew up with my maternal grandmother, with my parents and my maternal grandmother, and she spoke Malay. So it seemed natural to just grow up speaking Malay with her. And obviously, out of convenience, it would have been easier for me to study Malay in school anyway because of that.
For me personally, Urdu is just a language that is spoken in my family for like a lot of generations, and as a first or second generation Indian Muslim growing up in Singapore, it was a very natural decision that I took Urdu, and Alhamdulillah, one of the things that I'm really grateful for is that the local education system actually has these opportunities for like Indians to take their natural mother tongues.
So how would you describe your experience as being an Indian Muslim in Singapore?
I think my experiences as an Indian Muslim go insofar as I grew up seeing the maternal side of my family identifying very strongly as Indian. So although they spoke Malay, they speak Malay. They don't speak, at least not as far as I noticed, they don't speak any Indian, languages or dialects. But culturally, I think they identify much more as Indian than Malay. I myself don't. I feel a little bit odd to call myself an Indian Muslim, although racially I am. So yeah, even being here, I feel a bit odd because I don't know if I have the right to speak about my experience as an Indian Muslim, although I am one. So I think this space that I exist in is quite an odd one. But it's something that I know for a fact that some Indian Muslims experience as well. So I'm glad that I'm here to speak about that experience. If not for myself, then at least for people who identify. Yeah.
Oh, my experience. I think, okay, it's because I feel like usually my circle of friends are all Malays. Majority of them are Malays. Maybe because you tend to gravitate towards people that of the similar culture to you, and like if my Indian friends are usually Hindu or my Chinese friends are like Chinese, so I think it's rarer to find Chinese Muslims also. So yeah, and most of my friends are Malay. So I feel like maybe growing up I got influenced by the Malay culture, but at the same time because at home, my family watches like Malay movies and all. So, Tamil movies and all. So, I'm a bit diluted in that sense. So, I guess growing up as an Indian Muslim, I feel like a lot of my taste in music, movies are all like Indian, but my vibe is very Malay. Or at least that's what I get from my friends. People say that, "What, you seem quite Malay." So nobody will believe when I say I'm a Chinese Muslim or Indian Muslim. So yeah, I guess, yeah.
Being mixed race, it's kind of always fluctuated. Throughout my time in madrasah, I mostly identified as Indian Muslim because I was in a community of Malay Muslims and I was always seen as the other. I did have a few other Indian Muslims in class and like that made us feel very bonded and stuff. But coming out of madrasah and going into polytechnic and university, me wearing the hijab immediately had people associating me with being Malay just because I was Muslim. And it took me a while to be comfortable enough. Like when people say, "Oh, so you're Malay, right?" I always have this like denial coming up in me, like, no, like my whole life for the 10 years in madrasah, people have told me that I'm Indian. So why are you suddenly saying that I'm Malay? But I can't exactly veto the fact that I am part Malay. So when people say you're Malay, right, it always just leaves me in a very weird position to be unsure of like how to reply to them. Yeah. Okay, so I think my experience as an Indian Muslim in Singapore, it started off very rocky. I don't think I fully grasped what it meant to be an Indian Muslim in Singapore until much later in my life. I think a lot of my life when I was growing up, especially in primary school and also a bit in secondary school, I found myself like trying to assimilate with whichever group of friends or whichever like surrounding I was in. So like for example, because I was Malay speaking, right? Like I was taking Malay as a mother tongue, I found myself surrounded by more Malay friends, trying to overcompensate and trying to like blend in with them without really having the background for it, because I would like, my friends would talk about like soulful songs like Jiwang, right? When they're talking to each other and everything, they would bond over this, or they would talk about like certain movies and everything, and those are not part of my cultural like it's not what I grew up listening to or watching, and nor is it something that I continued to watch. Like when I went back home, my parents were turning on Sun TV and like Vijay TV, and we were watching like Vijay movies, Surya movies. That's my cultural. So I felt like kind of I was leading a double life. Like I had a life in school and the person I was kind of trying to be, and a life at home, which is why I think I eventually just gravitated towards like an English Western kind of culture. I realize I'm having this realization right now. Thanks, guys. But like, I think I kind of gravitated towards the English culture because it felt more like both my worlds had that in common. Like I could always talk about English stuff with my friends and my family, so I never had to hide that part of me. But only later on in my life, I would say maybe somewhere in JC and mostly in uni, I learned to kind of like embrace my Indian side a bit more and really understand that like Indian Muslim in itself is an identity. Yeah.
The way I did things perhaps wasn't something that majority of students did in my schools. So I always felt the need to dissociate myself from my actual ethnic roots and perhaps identify as someone just neutral, like a neutral being, you know. I think that was something that I identified myself with in JC. Like I just thought that I'm just a neutral person and my language just happens to be Tamil, but that's about it. Like I didn't have like much cultural influences in my life because I feel like mostly I just spoke English like at home or like in school, and a lot of my peers were like non-Indian Muslims as well, or like non-Muslims actually, like as a whole. So I felt the need to just maybe be someone that's just neutral, you know. Yeah. I had the sense of not belonging here nor there because I always had this mixed identity in the sense that I could fit in with the Indians, but not exactly completely fit in with them. I could fit in with the Malays, but not exactly fit in with them as well. So that was my Indian Muslim experiences growing up with friends in the community per se. It's always that concern or like the question about not being as Indian as people might want you to be or people would perceive you to be. Yeah.
Okay, so how would you say Islam beautifies Indian culture, being an Indian Muslim?
So, I think it's that Islam, that concept of Islam, that Muslim culture that actually unites us all together, I feel. Because despite like our preferences and all, at least we have something that we can connect to, that everyone does the same. So like when we are going to pray, we pray together, read du'as together. So at least there's something that connects us together despite our differences in taste, our differences in like food preferences and all. Yeah.
I don't know how Islam beautifies Indian culture specifically, but I do just enjoy to see how, especially in dressing, like how Indian Muslim dresses come about and everything. Like those are very beautiful. Like my sister's wedding gown, like the gargara and everything was very it's just nice to see how culture is represented even as we practice our religion. Yeah. When I saw this question, and I heard about this question, I think it was one of the most interesting questions. We all know nasheeds, right? And actually, Indian culture also, their music is rich. It's so rich. And it also has a rich culture of poetry. Watch me blank out as I try to remember a poet's name. I think there was a poet named Iqbal. There's another one, but I can't remember his name. Okay, but anyways, it has a rich culture of poetry. And how Islam beautifies it is because you can now start to listen and find nasheeds that are blended with these sonically beautiful songs. Blending, like how Islam beautifies it, like you take something that's culturally Indian and then it becomes like something that you can kind of use to appreciate Islam and God and the Prophet and so on and so forth.
So I really like that question because usually the point of discussion is always Islam versus culture. And while that is a very valid and important conversation to have, what really goes missing, I feel, is the conversation on how Islam beautifies culture. And not even particularly Indian culture, but all cultures in general, because Islam was sent as a mercy to all mankind. Islam is for everyone. And being Muslim does not mean that you have to abandon your unique cultural experiences, if only Islam actually refines and beautifies your own unique cultures that you are already in. So bringing it back to the Indian culture, I would say Indian culture really emphasizes on brotherhood and sisterhood. So, usually we refer to people like oh bhai. Even if you see like an Indian person in a shop, sometimes people colloquially refer to them as bhai, which is like brother in Hindi or Urdu. So that camaraderie definitely exists, and in Islamic context, the Muslim brotherhood and Muslim sisterhood is a really big thing, and the fact that everyone is treated equally, and what comes to mind is this hadith, like no Arab is superior to a non-Arab, and likewise no non-Arab is superior to an Arab, and what really matters is your piety and your good deeds in the eyes of God.
So the last thing was about language. So for Indian culture, I don't know if this answers the question already, but for Indian culture, specifically Tamil, we have our language is geared in such a way that we have suffixes. Trying to remember. We have suffixes that we attach to words to make it more respectful towards our elderly, which kind of is in line with Islam as well, because we are taught to be more respectful towards our elderly and everything. And I think that's just kind of a nice way of how both things kind of come together, Islam and Indian culture. Yeah.
That's actually a very good point.
Thanks.
So what are some things about being Indian Muslim, or in your case, being part Chinese and part Indian, that you greatly appreciate?
I think the fun part about being mixed race is because I can relate to a bigger group of people, I guess. Because if I meet my Indian friends, I understand what they're talking about. Like if let's say they talk about their celebrations, Thaipusam, Pongal, okay, oh yeah, I know. I can relate to them. Then if I meet my Chinese friends, they talk about Chinese New Year, they talk about their celebration, their steamboat. yeah, I can completely relate. I know what's happening because, in fact, Chinese New Year, I do celebrate Chinese New Year because only my dad converted. So the Chinese side, like my grandparents, my nephews, cousins, they do celebrate Chinese New Year. So yeah, I guess it feels good that I can relate to everyone. Like whenever there's any occasion, people are sharing their stories. I understand, and yeah, it feels cool, I guess. And yeah, I think then when with the Muslim community, like the Malays, we celebrate Hari Raya together, and because like I said, I have a lot of Malay friends, so I know what they're talking about, or like yeah, in that sense we can vibe.
Going back to my point about being Indian Muslim in Singapore, why I say I appreciate it is because there's so much color in like the different types of Indians that we have here that every time I meet another Indian Muslim, there's always something different in their experience that I can learn about and something that I can share from my experience that they didn't know about. Like I'm just so amazed by how beautiful, like how much effort goes into like the designs and how intricate it is and everything. So I'm really appreciative of like the beauty of like our traditional clothes, and actually I think in general a lot of our culture, like in terms of like even the songs, the music, I kind of touched on it earlier. So it has like a really good history. Even the literature, actually, I don't think I have personally looked into it as much, which I'm trying to work on. But I know that Indian culture has a strong and rich literary history from each language, in fact. And I think one of the reasons that I haven't looked into it was because of the language barrier, because unfortunately I learned Malay when I was growing up. Not that it's a bad thing, it's just that there's like that language barrier now that if I want to look into Tamil literature, I will have to first like really master my Tamil before I can go into that. There's a lot to be appreciative of as an Indian. I think we come from a very diverse background, and we have such a rich cultural history. It's always fun to learn more about your background.
The Indian fashion, like the traditional fits like saris, lehengas, Punjabi suits, kurtis, like all these, like they are like on a range of like casual fits to like grand fits that you can wear for like weddings and stuff, you know. And I think they all have like a very rich element of culture in them that is very rare to be seen in like other cultures. So it's very unique to like the Indian culture per se, and I think that's also something that people of other ethnicities can appreciate and do like try to adopt that into their culture. So I think that's really like pleasant and very like heartwarming to see when there's appreciation for the Indian culture in other like races, events as well. Like for example, like I think recently I saw like a Malay wedding where like the bride and groom, or like even the guests, they were wearing like Indian fits. So I think that was like really nice to see, because these are all independent races, but living in Singapore, we want to like integrate these different races, and I think witnessing such moments is just like the fruition of what Singapore has been trying to do these many years, and what could perhaps represent like how united our community is, like, because there are also like certain Malay friends that I have, and then their families, they also watch like Bollywood movies. So it's quite nice to have like a middle ground for you to like relate to them, you know.
When you think about the Islamic culture in Indian culture, certain ideas come to mind. So certain ways of practicing the religion come to mind, certain images come to mind. And I think a lot of those images I don't identify with. So something that has been great for me personally in my practice of Islam as an Indian Muslim, in the way that I experience it, is that I'm free to define myself how I wish, which I don't think is a privilege that many people seem to realize that they have as easily.
So, growing up, what are some of the common misconceptions you've heard about Indian Muslims?
I mean, there's this standard of like, do you celebrate Deepavali? Which no, I don't. But then I have relatives who celebrate Deepavali. Then it's like, oh, what do I say?
It's like just the fact that when they find out that I'm Muslim, they just think that I'm Malay.
One of the funniest story that I heard from my dad. So my dad was praying at the mosque. Then there was this guy, he should be Malay lah. Then he came to approach my dad. Then he said, because he was looking at my dad from a distance for quite some time. So after my dad finished praying, I think he just couldn't contain the curiosity. So he just went to my dad and asked, "You come in Malay?" Then my dad just looked at him and smiled. Then my dad said, "No, I converted to Muslim. I'm a Muslim, you know." So then the guy, he took a moment to think. I was like, actually, yeah, that makes sense. And I think it was quite funny because it got people to think, you know, like race is race, religion is religion. Yeah, don't get confused. Yeah.
It started becoming like something so consistent. Like recently I had an experience like in uni itself, like where this person asked me if I celebrate Deepavali. People don't exactly know how to differentiate race and religion, you know? Like how can we like make this clearer? Like why is it that this is so confusing, especially when it comes to Indian Muslims, you know? Like I think when I was younger, I used to think that maybe I can just use this misconception and just leave home early whenever it was like Deepavali time, because there were so many students just leaving for home, right? Then I was like, okay, maybe I can just leave because nobody would know. No one actually understands. Yeah, so I had such moments where maybe you can say I could use to my advantage but I didn't, of course. I stayed true to my identity.
Like they would assume that I'm Malay. Yeah, sorry. So that, which is also very fascinating to think about, because that's just a very Singaporean specific context. If you go look at another country, like for example in Britain, the majority of Muslims there tend to be either Arab or Indians, or not Indian, South Asian, sorry. So it's a very different, like you get a very different answer and perhaps very different experience over there. For instance, if you were Indian Muslim in Britain, you would probably feel like a lot of people get accidentally people would perceive Muslims who are not South Asians as South Asians, because you would associate that, right? They would probably have the same struggle that we are going through, just because over there South Asians are the ones who are the majority Muslims. So just something to think about.